well, let's just talk about your title. It's weirdly immodest, I think. I contain multitudes.
That's right. I've read a poem. Try not to faint.
Yeah. So, how did you choose the title?
It was pretty much the first title. Like it was always going to be the title. Like the minute I came up with the idea for the book, that was it. There were no other. I think I think We Are Legion was an option, but isn't that like vaguely satanic?
What's your other option?
We Are Legion.
We Are Legion. Yeah.
That's a little sinister.
Yes. Okay, good choice.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to begin by just, first of all, this is, microbes are rather new to human beings, right? I mean, it is only recently that we even knew they were there. How did we discover them?
So the man who first saw microbes was a Dutch person called Anthony van... sorry, I've tried to... Thank you. Thank you.
This is
exactly what he said. I've tried to pronounce this before and had historians of medicine go, oh, please. And then Dutch historians of medicine just dying. So Anthony, as I will call him.
This is why you're not in FM radio. See, if you're in the radio business, a name like Leeuwenhoek, like when people in what I do see Barbara Streisand, we think Barbara Streisand. We could say anything about her. So this is, I'll call him, you call him Anthony, I'll call him Leeuwenhoek.
Tony.
Okay.
Andy. E. coli, the famous bacterium. So the E stands for Escherichia. And I know this because I tried saying it for the very first, having written it a million times before, tried saying it the first time sometime last year, and I suddenly realized midway through that I had no idea how it was pronounced. So it came out like like a strangled gargle.
But that could set a trend, and everyone would think that's the correct pronunciation.
That's right.
It would be, yeah.
Okay, so Anthony. Dutch guy. He was a draper. This was in 1675. He is not a trained scientist. He's not a scholar of any kind.
He's a draper?
And
he sells
haberdashery,
Oh, clothes.
And he's a civic servant as well. He does some, So he also has two really crucial things. One of which is an insatiable curiosity. And he also has the world's best microscopes. And he turns those microscopes, so they look like a door hinge. So they're about credit card sized. He grinds these impossibly perfect spherical lenses, really tiny, and he sandwiches them between two brass plates. And he creates this thing that he has to hold up super close to his eye and look he has to have sunlight coming in through his studio to view things on him. But those microscopes are about 10 times better than anything that anyone else has around in the day.
Because between selling dresses, he's good at grinding glass.
He's surprisingly, he's got Jedi level skills at making really tiny lenses. For some unknown reason, and he creates these microscopes which are amazing, and he turns them and everything around. So he looks at bits of animals and plants, and he, for reasons best known only to himself, used them to look at drops of water. So water that are collected in a pot outside his house, and from canals and from a lake, and in that water he sees these multitudes. Of living things, tiny little organisms that no one else had seen before, and I feel like that's.
These are little sticky things or rods or.
So they vary. Some of them are little little spheres that are just moving about. Some are long rods and they're just shooting through the water. He likens them to eels and pikes. They are animated. They're clearly alive. They have motion. He thinks they're pretty.
Why didn't he go, ew? which would be an acceptable reaction if you're going to drink it.
It's an acceptable reaction now, but back then, he was excited at the prospect of seeing all these creatures. Like, we now associate microbes with illness and dirt and pestilence, but back then, no one even knew that they exist. So he thought it was just a really cool thing. All these creatures that no one else had ever seen before, and he was the first person to do so.
In your book, he actually explores not only the rainwater in a pot, but his teeth.
That's right, yeah. So he scrapes plaque from his teeth, and he looks at them through his impossibly good microscopes. And he also, again, sees a multitude of living things. And again, he is really excited by this. You know, right now, if you tell someone that they have trillions of organisms living in their body, as I have repeatedly done, a lot of people are very grossed out by it, but he was not. There was no cultural baggage associated with these things at the time. No one knew that they were causes of disease. No one even knew what they were, if they were important.
How many of them do you carry versus the number of cells in you that belong innately to you, given to you by your mom and dad?
Right, so the latest estimates say 37 trillion on average microbes in my body. And
how many cells, or whatever would be?
30 trillion of my own cells, so roughly 1 to 1.
That's a revision. I've heard for the last 10 years it was like 10 times.
That's right.
Yeah, whoa.
Yeah. Turns out that was a ratio that people just kind of made up. It was a hastily scrawled back of the envelope calculation that got taken way, way, way out of hand. But yeah, latest estimates suggest about 1 to 1. Which I like how suddenly the idea that you have as many microbial cells in your body as human cells becomes boring, because everyone thought 10 to 1. Oh, it's only 1. You're only half microbe.
Well, but here's where it got really interesting to me again. In the book, there's a very startling little sentence which says that your left hand has a largely different population of bacteria than your right hand. So these are neighborhoods of microbes in you, and they're very weirdly neighborhoody.
Right, yeah. So I think of, in the book, I liken the body to like a series of islands. So each one has its own resident fauna, its own characteristics, its own climate. So my forearm, for example, is very dry and parched and barren, whereas the inside of my nose, my mouth is humid and moist, like a rainforest. I'm sorry for saying the word moist. It's like a rainforest. So they're very, very different habitats.
But left hand and right hand, that's true?
Apparently so, and who knows why? Maybe it's because you use them for different things. You know, there's in broad scale ecology, there's a thing called the Wallace line. So Alfred Russel Wallace was an explorer, contemporary of Darwin, and he showed that there is this line. I think it's between. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's between Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. It's like a really, really tight, so between two islands, Bali and Lombok, this tiny little gap between the islands, and yet the fauna of those two places are vastly different. On one side, you have like all the animals and plants of Indonesia, and the other side, you have all the ones from Australasia. And the keyboard is a bit like that. So between G and H, there was a group of people who looked at the microbiome of keyboard, and there seemed to be differences. So the line between G and H is a bit like the line between Bali and Lombok, because your hands are so different. Why?
Well, does that mean, though, that when I stick my finger up my nose...
Please don't do that.
I won't do it. I'm just going to think it's a sort of thought experiment. If I take it, will the microbes on my finger say, "Oh, who are these people?" And the nose say, "I don't know who they..." I mean, they're like, are they strange? These are segregated microbial communities.
Microbes can't talk, Robert.
Yes. But one imagine.
Okay. Yes, essentially, yes. And the microbes in your nose are very interesting too. So there was a really, really cool study, which is not in the book, so this is special to all of you guys, that came out really recently showing that there is a microbe in the nose, or that's in the noses of about something like 10% of people that produces this antibiotic that kills off staph, so the bacterium behind MRSA. It turns out that the nose is a really good place to look at if you want to find new antibiotics, because our bodies are ecosystems.
The human nose?
The human nose.
Oh.
Because we are all these big ecosystems. We contain lots and lots of different species within us, and they're all competing for nutrients, for space. And that competition is apparently really intense in the nose, because the mouth and the gut are constantly flooded with nutrients because we eat all the time, whereas the nose is a parched wasteland of nutrients. So anything that lives in the nose has to be super competitive in order to survive there. So they're more likely to produce things that kill other microbes. So they're a good place to look for antibiotics.
So could you sell your inner nose to Pfizer?
Yeah, that's right.
I'll license you.
I did that 35 minutes
Let's talk
ago.
about how you get your microbial population.
Okay.
When you're a fetus swimming around in your mom, are you covered by these things already, or what?
No. So the long-standing idea is that the womb is a sterile environment, so no microbes in there. You get your first microbes when you are born, because you pass through your mom's vagina and you pick up her vaginal microbes, and those are your 0th birthday present.
Really? So that's hello microbes is vaginal microbes.
That's right.
And then when your brother kisses you, that's part B, and your dog part C, and the nurse and so on.
Yep.
And what about breastfeeding?
Okay, so
wait, before I say that, what about a cesarean? Like, what if they pluck you out and you've got no vaginal
Right,
experience?
that's a good question. So it looks like when you take a baby out through C-section, they end up with a different microbiome initially. So a lot of those microbes come from the skin, and they come from the hospital environment.
Really? So they pull you out, you're like mostly nurse.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I
it's just
see.
like mostly a catheter, bedpan.
Mostly bedpan.
Yeah. And the big question now, I think, for people who study this is whether that leads to problems later on. Like whether everything normalizes and whether it all shakes out in the long term, or whether those initial differences lead to very distinct trajectories later on.
Okay, so then once you're out, and we go to the breastfeeding, is it true that the mother's donation at that point is crucial, or
Yes.
to you?
Yes, so this is one of my favorite microbiome stories, because I think it really it exemplifies a lot of the themes in the book, because it takes something so familiar and so like everyday. Like we think like everyone has either been breastfed, or at the very least watched someone breastfeeding, right? So we know what it is. It's a way of nourishing a baby, and yet about 10% of breast milk consists of these little sugars that babies cannot digest, and those sugars are specifically there to nourish the baby's first microbes, and specific strains that are really good at breaking them down.
So mother is actually tending to the microbial population under the false impression that she's suckling her baby.
She is doing both, in fairness. She is mainly tending to the infant, but also sorting out the microbes on the side.
If you haven't been breastfed for the usual 5 years or whatever it was back in Louis XIV's time, do you then come back less or more protected against the world? Like, if mom is feeding your what is it called, the B infantis. So if you're feeding your B infantis and your B infantis go on to marshal the troops, that's, I assume, wonderful. But what if your mom stopped breastfeeding you like 3 weeks in and decided to do something else?
That's, again, a good question. So it looks like if you follow, again, you get differences early on. So breastfed versus non-breastfed, you see changes in the microbiome. If you follow those people like over the course of their entire lives, so if you look at adults who are breastfed versus non-breastfed, or C-section versus vaginal birth, you don't really see that much difference. So it definitely looks like it all normalizes after a while. And the big question now is whether those early differences matter, like whether they have an impact in the long run. And I think the answer is we just don't know.
And when you say it normalizes after a while, when do you become the microbial hotel that is you?
So typically by about age 3, you've settled on like an adult community, and then it changes, it's dynamic, it waxes and wanes with hours and months, or every mouthful, but there's a lot of stability fertility. But in those early years, like I liken the gut of a newborn infant to like a forest that's just been raised by fire, or like an island that's just popped out of the sea. So it's a new habitat. And in those big scale landscapes, you see these very predictable patterns. So on a new island, you'll get mosses and lichens settling first, and then you'll get shrubs, and then you'll get trees, and that's called succession. So predictable waves of species colonize a new landscape, and it's exactly the same in the gut. You can see some microbes coming in early, they fade away, latecomers take their place, predictable steps. Exactly the same as if we were a large thing like a forest.
And I'm just wondering, like, when you are older and you give off an aroma, like I'm thinking, let's say, oh, I went to the closet. This happens to a lot of kids. I went to the closet. I know Grandma's been here because I smell her coat. Her coat must have been here. So she's leaving the imprint of Grandma. Or if you have a lover, you say, oh, you can get, there's all these T-shirt experiments where you like the T-shirt of your boyfriend or your girlfriend. When does that signature? By the way, are those smells microbiomal effervescences?
Possibly.
Possibly.
So there was one really cool study showing that like mosquitoes seem to be attracted to people with certain microbes on their skin rather than other people. So it might, like which microbes you carry on your body might explain why some of us can walk through like a cloud of midges and be perfectly fine, whereas everyone else is like just a big welt like me.
Let me another thing. If I once shook hands with President Kennedy,
right? Yeah,
is my most
way to name drop, just
yes.
seamless.
No, but I was reading the book and I was wondering. So when I shook hands with President Kennedy,
you shook hands with President Kennedy.
I did. How much Kennedy do you think I got, and how long did it stay? And if I like met my sister and said, don't touch my hand. It's the Kennedy hand, so she, being my sister, grabbed at it. How much Kennedy did she get?
Five.
I knew when I was making this thing with you, this was exactly what's going to happen to me.
Wait, so
we have slightly different styles.
Does anyone play roller derby? No, really. This is a scientific question. Don't laugh. Come on. Okay, so there was someone in Oregon, I think, did this amazing study with like a roller derby team where they swabbed their microbiome, their skin microbes before and after a game. Like someone's skating behind them. What a cute it. Before and after a game. They found that after the game, the skin microbiomes of players who played together were more similar than before. So yeah, or like all the hip checks, you do trade stuff. Like it doesn't last. It's not like a forever imprint, but you do trade. Like, well,
let's just talk about an environment just briefly. Like this. All right.
There you go. It's I'm so sorry.
This room is filled with people who weren't here 3 hours ago. Will this room begin to just catch the flavor of us?
Yes.
Yes.
So we are
measurably.
Yeah. So I think if you leave it enough time, like maybe certainly by the time we finish this session, we will have imprinted some of our microbial character, which let's remind ourselves is part of us, onto the space. We are constantly bleeding microbes into space. We are ejecting this aura of microbes around us. Everyone is so grossed out right now at their partners. You can't help but do it. You breathe. We scratch ourselves. We move. Like every action releases parts of ourselves onto the world around us, and that imprint is it's identifiable. Like you can. So
you described something called the Home Microbiome Project, which was an attempt to actually see what kind of impression, stink, perfume, whatever you have, is left. If people move, if somebody moves into a house, like a dorm room, and then is replaced by someone else, that represents a multitudes are moving in and out when Harry leaves and Tommy comes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wow. It is, it's like a forest that's being like cleared by fire, repopulated, cleared again. New communities, species overturning the previous lot.
So this idea of multitudes is literal. Like when we go anywhere, we shed, flavor, populate, move on, diminish, ebb, gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's two acts of us, the ones we think of as us, and this aura around us.
Yeah, that's
both
right.
of them doing business.
Yeah, and so this is in the last chapter of the book. Spoiler alert, because I spend 9 chapters talking about how the microbes in our own body affect our health, our lives, our evolution, and then in the last chapter, I wanted to show that our microbiomes also connect us to the world around us, and in a very, very literal way. There is this two-way traffic, so we're not only expelling microbes into the spaces around us, but also, picking stuff up from everything we touch.
Well, let's go inside the body now. What do microbes do for us? It seems like if I have, say, a gut, so that's a lot of inner space. It is trying, I'm going to eat a hamburger. So the hamburger I want to keep in my gut and have it sort of move slowly to my cells, through the blood system. But what does the microbiome do for me in that regard? Is it like part of the wall, or? So
it's helping to break down that food. So for us, it's reasonably important. For something like a cow or a sheep, it becomes like utterly vital. So a cow will probably get something like 70% of its energy through the digestive powers of the microbes in its gut, and as a result, it's expanded the gut into this gigantic fermenter that's there to house and to nourish microbes.
Which actually raises a question. If I am a plant-eating animal, or if I am a meat-eating animal, somehow instinct tells me that the meat-eating animal, it's meat, it's got protein, it seems thicker and fatter and more that I would need more microbes to take care of my meaty diet. Is that right?
No, it's the other way around. So plants are much tougher for us to break down. They contain a wide array of complex carbohydrates that we just call fiber, and that we do not have the digestive chops to destroy that. Like, we don't have the enzymes in our genome that are necessary to break down that wide variety of stuff. But microbes do. Like a single microbe will probably have more fiber-busting enzymes in its genome than we do in ours. And then there are multitudes of them, each with their own particular specialities. So if you eat a heavily vegetarian diet with lots of wide variety of sources of fiber, you can nourish a more diverse ecosystem of bacteria inside your gut. And that's true on an individual level, from if you look at vegetarians versus meat eaters, and it's true at a species level. So if you compare herbivores like a gorilla or a cow versus a meat eater like a lion or a tiger or a bear, oh my.
What if I decide? Yeah. Also, speaking about cows, like they have like zones. They have mini stomachs, right? And then they also have that chewing thing that they do after they've eaten. They spew it back into their mouths. So those are so they're doing an awful lot more business. The same microbes, and they're doing it anaerobically. So that's like that's like kind of out of the real world inside a cow.
Yeah. So the gut turns out to be a really weird environment. It's starved of oxygen. It is dark, but it's full of nutrients, and that combination is kind of odd on the planet. Which is why if you look at like the microbes that live in the vertebrate gut, so us, other backbone animals, they're very different to microbe communities that live like pretty much anywhere else.
What if I gave a cow a huge dose? No, let's not make it a cow. Let's suppose I gave you an enormous dose of antibiotics, and so you didn't have all these allies in you. So you don't have the population that is helping you digest. You don't have the population that is lining your gut walls. Then what consequence? Like, what goes wrong when they go away? So
that's a really good question, because obviously antibiotics, like a lot of people take a lot of antibiotics, and they are unsubtle tools. So antibiotics are clear. Let's stipulate antibiotics are a clear health good. They have saved countless of lives. They're really important, but they are also broad weapons. They destroy the bacteria that we rely upon as well as the ones that are causing us harm. And there is a lot of work going on now trying to work out like what happens. So in any ecosystem, there is a concept called resilience. So if you punch it, it will bounce back. And the question then becomes, how many times do you need to hit it before it can't bounce back, before it ends up like over there in a different state? And honestly, we don't know. Like, there's been a lot of work on antibiotics at various stages, what they do to the microbiome. There's a lot of evidence showing that you get these bounce backs, and then there are hints also of these long-term problems. And like the most obvious sign that there are long-term problems is that you might get an infection of Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. So that's a very weedy, invasive bacterium that causes severe, recurring, and often fatal bouts of diarrhea. And it often happens in hospitals because people take lots and lots of antibiotics and they clear out their native flora and they create openings where this invader can take hold.
So that's the thing you worry about, that there'll be cracks in your system and things that should be in your blood or in your intestines will slip out of place and go elsewhere? And then
yeah, so that's one problem. So there are actual, there are seals between the cells of the gut, and they could become more porous, so you get stuff going into your bloodstream, triggering inflammation and immune reactions. But also, you just open up space. Your gut is not like, it's a crowded environment. There's loads of stuff there already competing for the resources that you're giving them. And if you take those out, then there's a chance that things that are very good at colonizing those empty niches will come in instead. And the things that are really good at doing that are weedy, pathogenic species that are likely to cause disease.
There is a list of diseases that seem to be associated with bacteria and with these microbes that it's shocking to me. Because I'm just quoting the book.
Yeah.
Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel, colon cancer, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, asthma, certain dermatitis, allergies, heart disease, autism, periodontitis, I guess back to the mouth, acne, liver cirrhosis, alcoholism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, depression, chronic fatigue syndrome. When we get there, I think, I don't even know what you're talking about. Rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, of course, at this point in the list it would be psoriasis,
Brexit.
Stroke. Like, can we say that your microbial health, if it goes bad, would have something to do with all of these diseases?
So that is a list. So I actually put that entire list in the book almost to invite parody because it's so long, right? Like,
yeah,
it's pretty much like everything has been linked to the microbiome. And people do joke about this. And the thing is that a lot of those things are correlations. So they're taking people with and without the conditions and looking at their microbiomes and finding changes. And of course you'll find changes because pretty much everything, like, it's this vast community inside you. If something didn't change the microbiome, I'd be very surprised. The question is then, are those changes a consequence of the condition, or do they cause it? And you can answer that by doing experiments like taking mice with the condition, taking their microbiome and implanting it into a mouse that is either normal or has no microbes of its own, so a sterile rodent, and seeing if some of those symptoms transfer across. And in many cases, they do.
What were the ones that were most surprising to you in cases where they do?
I think the first one I wrote about was obesity. So that was like 10 years ago. This was in 2006, and this was one of the classic papers in the field that galvanized a lot of interest. So you took a fat mouse and put its microbes inside a germ-free mouse. You did the same with a lean. So fat and lean mouse put their microbes in germ-free mice, and the ones that have the fat communities put on more weight than those with the lean communities. And that suggests that there is they're having an influence. So even if they're not initiating these conditions, they're at least exacerbating them. They are grabbing the wheel rather than just going along for the ride.
You know what that suggests to an ordinary capitalist? I go to the skinny friends, I say, can I have all of your gut microbes, please? And then I take to my fat self and I go, And then 3 days later, I become skinny. Now,
Yes.
assuming that there's a
you mean that that means eating their poo, right?
Well, we'll get to eating poop later. I just somehow magically transferred their gut biome.
Okay.
So, but that is what this guy in Missouri seemed to do.
Jeff Gordon.
Jeff Gordon. Yeah.
Jeff Gordon is one of the leading microbiome scientists around, and also Robert's former roommate.
Yes.
Who knew? Jeff did this experiment, which I think has a lot to say about this scenario that you envisaged. So he gave mice will actually eat each other's poop. Turns out lots of animals do it. So they're very good at taking a neighbor's microbiome and putting it in themselves. And so they did this experiment, which they call the Battle of the Microbes, where they loaded mice with both microbes from an obese and a lean person, and then put them in the same cage. So they eat. Microbes meet in their guts, and what happens? It turns out if you put the microbes of a lean mouse if you put the lean community, so the microbes from a lean person, into a mouse with an obese community, that lean community will take over. But only if the mice are eating a healthy diet. Because we talked about fiber, right? So if you give them all a healthy diet with lots of fiber, then you create all these opportunities, all these vacancies. And then when the community from the lean mouse, which is loads of fiber-busting species in it, come in, they go, yum, 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 lots to eat, they can take over. If you do the opposite experiment, if you put the microbes from if you take the obese community and put in the mouse with the lean community, they don't take over. And that's because the mouse with the lean community is already eating everything. They've occupied all the niches, all the space that's available. There's nothing left for the other colonists to eat.
So when I first read about what Jeff was doing, I just assumed, I just made it very simple for myself. Mm-hmm. I just put two bowls of Cheerios in front of two different mice. I said, you have the oat-loving gut bacteria, right, and you, my friend, have gut bacteria that hate oats. Now let's have breakfast. So the first mouse goes and eats all the oats. And because its gut bacteria love oats, they turn all that oats into energy and fat and sugars and whatever else, and that mouse bloats from breakfast. But over here, the mouse that was eating the same bowl of cereal, same amount, its gut bacteria doesn't like Cheerios, so it just goes and it just poops out. So this mouse ignores its meal, this mouse enjoys its meal, this mouse stays skinny, this mouse gets fat, but what you've just said is a little bit more complicated than that.
It is. I mean, to sum it all up, because it's a really complicated experiment, basically, if you get the lean microbes, if you get the microbes from your skinny friend and put them in you, they'll only make you skinnier if you eat healthily. So you might as well eat healthily already, because that will make you, I think the message from a lot of these studies is that there is no shortcuts, right? Everyone wants the panacea. Everyone wants the thing that will solve all your health problems with minimal effort. Critically with minimal effort. Turns out it's not that simple. You still need to make the effort.
One of the items on this list caught my eye just because it seems so weird to me, and you do go into it a little bit, autism.
Right.
What would autism have to do with gut bacteria?
Okay, so there was an experiment where if you there's a microbe called Bacteroides fragilis, or B-Frag, has anti-inflammatory properties. And a guy called Sarkis Mazmanian did a lot of work showing that it can calm down inflammation. It can tell the immune system to just chill a little bit, not go berserk. It can calm down inflammatory and autoimmune diseases in mice. And when he tried this on mice that are supposedly representative of autism, their behavior changed. So they became more exploratory. They became a little bit more they showed fewer repetitive movements. Now, big caveat, of course, mice aren't people, and mice don't have autism. Autism is a human thing that is strongly influenced by our social constructs about what is considered normal. But that being said, what this study does show is that microbes influence our behavior. right? They can change the way we act. They can change our resilience to stress or our susceptibility to anxiety.
And how would that work? If I am an autistic mouse and I then...
You're a mouse that looks autistic-ish.
Okay. If I'm a mouse that looks autistic-ish and my situation is improved, then what is happening inside me?
So that is the critical question, and it's something that's still being worked out. But there are lots of ways in which you can imagine the gut influencing the brain. So there's this thing called the gut-brain axis, this two-way line of communication from here to here. There are nerves that run that whole length. There's the vagus nerve. There are the immune system could act as a conduit. So immune changes that go on in the gut can affect what goes on in the brain. Microbes in the gut release neurotransmitters. They produce dopamine and serotonin, things that we think of as brain signaling chemicals, but then travel to other parts of the body. So it's all connected. I think that's another thing to bear in mind. I talked about all these disparate ecosystems, these very, very different worlds on an individual, and yet those worlds are connected. There is movement between them.
Well, one of the lessons I kind of learned reading this book is that what a microbiome does when it's a healthy and benign one is it keeps you compartmentalized so things don't leak into other things. Mm-hmm. It says, as you just says, chill. It says like, okay, too much, calm down, easy going. And so it's just sort of it's
got a good radio voice.
It's kind of a gentle. And this, if you were ever to buy a T-shirt from this book, it would be "Go Mucus." It seems like you decide somewhere in the middle of the book that mucus is like so fine, and it's such a rare thing to meet a pro-mucus person. So I wonder if you could just briefly salute in your own special way mucus.
My publishers are there. Can we get "Go Mucus" T-shirt? Yes, amazing. Yeah, I met a guy called Forrest Rower who thinks mucus is really cool. He once told me that he had the world's biggest collection of animal mucus. And I was like, is the second place person like close to you? Or are there lots of people with small collections and you're like up here?
No, that's when he mentioned Mucusville, Oregon, and you learned that there's a mucus capital somewhere.
That's right, yeah, and the mucus cabal.
Yeah, so but what is it about mucus that you so admire? Since most of us have never really been charmed by the thought of
mucus, right. So over the gut, there is a wall of mucus, a great wall of mucus, and it's there to keep the microbes in the gut away from everything else within it, so the bloodstream, everything. So it keeps the microbes that we depend upon in place. It's like a fence. It corrals them. And it turns out that mucus is full of viruses, but viruses called bacteriophages that are harmless to us, but that kill bacteria. And Forrest's idea is that those viruses are part of our immune system. So they keep the microbiome in check. They keep its numbers from blooming out of control. It's like a classic predator-prey thing in any large ecosystem. Bacteria get out of hand, viruses destroy them. And it's possible that the viruses help to select which species get to live there because different phages have specificity for different microbes which they target.
So if I were head of the Kleenex Corporation, I would rebrand my product as proud supporters of the mucus world and regular containers of your mucus. Hang it up on your wall after you're done. It's the Kleenex way.
Yeah, I like how my head of marketing is just laughing silently in the corner. This is why scientists don't do that.
Let's talk about, you mentioned that this is the Anthropocene now.
Yes.
This is a time when humans are suddenly aware that they are going to begin to shape the geology of the world, the biology of the world, and then, of course, the microbiome of the world might also be manipulable. So this gets to the poop thing, I guess. First of all, let me before we get to poop, like if I grow up in southern India, okay, and I'm eating chicken when I'm lucky, but I'm eating mostly a rice diet, and I have my pets are my pet chicken, And I crawl around on the ground quite a bit because it's so warm. So when I'm a toddler, I can just let my parents just leave me. I even fall into bird poop a lot. So I get my
Where is this going?
I'll tell you.
Okay.
Now imagine me living as an Inuit kid. So now I'm in a colder place. There's a completely different set of plants around me. My favorite pet is a husky from our sled, and I eat a lot of fish. So my question is, if I were to move from India to Alaska, would my gut bacteria change? And if my friend Ikatuk in Alaska were to move to southern India, would his... I know this took a while, but yes, would his gut bacteria change? In other words, do what we eat and where we live have anything to do with how once we've gotten our mothers and our nurses and our original...
Yes.
Yes.
The answer is yes. So a couple of scientists recently tracked their own gut bacteria, like every day, I think every day for a very long period of time, and they did all sorts of things. You can see, like, if someone's, so that one of them like went to Bangkok and his gut bacteria changed. He got a nasty gastrointestinal bug. It changed again. He came home, changed back. You can see if you put if you swap people from a vegetarian to meat diet or vice versa, you get changes as well. So it's very, very responsive. It changes all the. It's kind of weird because there is this underlying stability, but also this layer of flexibility on top of it.
Well, then, what would happen if I have a terrible gut problems, and my wife has a really wonderful, no gastrointestinal problems, everything's in smooth, done smoothly, out smooth, she's just got the best. So what if I just were to just take a little bit of her poop and just somehow figure out a way to put it in a pill in me? Would that affect anything?
Yeah, maybe. So it depends on what you would have. So this is, what Robert is describing is the fecal transplant, which is one of the more aptly named medical procedures because it is exactly what it sounds like. You take poop from a healthy donor and put it in a sick person. And that has been it's been done for, since like ancient China. It's been rediscovered randomly, like on and off through time, but it's become, I wouldn't say popular, but I don't know, it's New York, maybe. But it's definitely growing in prominence, and the reason for that is because it turns out to be really good at treating infections of that bacterium I told you about, C. diff. There was one clinical trial in the Netherlands showing that standard antibiotics cured something like 27% of people with C. diff infections. But fecal transplants cured something like 94%. And, you know, a 94% cure rate with no ostensible side effects, with a cheap product, and it's cheap because it comes out of your bum, it is kind of unheard of in medicine.
Can this really be? I mean, we lived in the last century. The magical moment medically in the century was the discovery of antibiotics, and when World War II happened and the GIs could repair themselves with that medicine, it helped us win the war. We could put soldiers back into action, and then afterwards, everybody my age got antibiotics up the gazoo, and it was considered sort of all the things that my parents and grandparents had as kids we didn't have to have anymore, or many of them. And now you're saying that this much more simple system would beat vancomycin, I think was in that study?
Vancomycin, yeah, that's right.
By that, so this is now really, well, what's wrong with it? Let me ask you that, other than its peculiar quality.
Okay, so wait, so let me address the thing about why it works. Okay. So it works because the principle is that you're trying to returf a lawn that's been overrun with dandelions, right? So you've got this community in your gut that's dominated by this really invasive species, and you're trying to replace it with a healthier community. And it probably works because it is overrun. You've got this kind of weird, like, it's not quite a monoculture, but it's approaching that. It's a field of weeds. And because C. diff is often the result of taking lots of antibiotics in a hospital setting, and because people treat it with more antibiotics, you clear away a lot of the native flora that already live in the gut. So that is kind of an easier environment for a donor's community to take hold in and to colonize. If you consider something else like inflammatory bowel disease, for example, which has been there have been lots of trials, fecal transplants and IBD, Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, and the results are more mixed. There have been successes. It's hard. They're a bit inconsistent. There are also more failures. It's not quite as stark as victory as it is for something like C. diff, and it's probably just because it's a much harder environment. You've already got a bustling microbiome in you.
It's surprising to me because you're talking not about a precise change, but a kind of ecological change.
Yeah.
If you have an entire neighborhood with a vast communicating and coordinated set of organisms, and they're causing you trouble, and you say, bye-bye, everybody, and then you say, bring in party B, and in comes party B, and they essentially set up shop in the same stomach, and then off they go. Basically, it's hard to believe that you can just invite. It's like being in a cruise ship and saying, I don't really like Norwegians, I'm just going to switch to French, and boom, and suddenly your Norwegian ship is suddenly filled with French people. Doesn't that strike you as surprising?
But with a southern accent, apparently.
Yeah, right. It's sort of a miracle to me that it works at all.
It is, right? It is baffling. I totally grant you that. And that is why it's taken a lot of time for it to become accepted. But the evidence in trials is very strong, at least for C. diff infections. It's still unclear, though, why this works. Why does it work? What's actually being transferred? What stays in the gut of the recipient? There was this study that came out just, I think, last week or a couple of weeks ago, where a company tried to make what was a fake poop pill. And they tried to take microbes that are found in
fake poop pill?
A shampoo.
A shampoo. No, that's better. That's better than mucus for Go Mucus. A shampoo.
Better than mucus. Let's go.
Yeah.
More T-shirts. I don't know what I was talking about. Right. So they tried to make this fake poop pill. They tried to get bacteria from the gut and just grow them without the fecal bit. So it's more palatable. It's just the microbes. It's not anything else. And it's got something like 50 species in it. And it didn't work. They tried it in this trial of, again, C. diff patients. Early trial was quite promising. Later one was not. And again, who knows why that doesn't work? I don't think it's clear. But you hint at some reasons that these are complex ecological problems. It's not just finding a bug that looks good, that does well in a lab experiment, and go, we'll just put this in everyone and it'll be fine. You don't know whether it can establish itself. You don't know do you need the equivalent of those sugars in breast milk? Do you need to feed it with something specific? Do you need fiber? How will they interact with the microbes that are already in the host? How will they interact with variations in the host's immune system? Are there differences depending on the diet they eat, depending on your ethnicity? Any of these things, right? These are really complex questions, and the maths of the microbiome is much more complicated than just add this, subtract that, and off you go.
To wind this up, there is a sort of a cautionary mood in the book which describes essentially historically a sense of microbiomes. We didn't know they were there. Boom, they're there. And at first they just seem like germs. And so that, they do things like they rot your potatoes if you're a farmer, and they attack your crops, and they make you sick. And so these are things that you want to rub and scrub away. And then as the book goes on, the mood changes. I remember in my life there was the Dannon Yogurt Company began television ads in which they'd show these very old people in Kazakhstan with extremely long white beards who could still jig and just seemed to be very, very acute. And they said, if you eat yogurt, you could live pretty close to forever. And so I began eating it. And I began to get the sense that there's this, instead of antibiotics, now there's probiotics, a word which was not a word about 12 years ago, now is a very popular word. So we're now at a kind of a weird moment where the things we didn't like, we seem to like a lot. So speaking to the future, if we are living in an age where we humans try to basically manipulate everything, do you think that we should think of these things that we are discovering in us, that are in us and on us and around us, are things that we can tame and and solve all of these whole long list of diseases and get skinny and live forever? Or should we worry about something?
I feel we should be cautious, right? Because the field of medicine has just been fraught with so many overreaching claims. When antibiotics started becoming big, people said that we would bring infectious disease under heel very quickly. We have not done that. When the human genome was first sequenced, it was suggested that the secrets locked within would offer cures to to cancers, to neurodegenerative diseases, and that is still very much a work in progress. So I don't want to fall into the same trap with the microbiome, where we're making claims now that we're just going to look back and think we're horrendously naive in about 10 years' time. And we are making those claims. There is a lot of hype around this field. But I think the critical thing that I want people to understand after reading the book, and this was actually the very first chapter I wrote for the book, is chapter 4. And what is now chapter 4. And it has this bit where I talk about how there
Is that how this works? You begin in the middle? Oh, you didn't know it?
Yeah.
Huh, okay.
I
wonder if Mark Twain worked that way.
So that chapter starts with a bit about how there is no such thing as a good microbe or a bad one. So this idea that the idea we used to have that all microbes were germs that we needed to destroy has been replaced, or is being slowly replaced, by this this nice communal idea about friendly microbes and good bugs and all of that. And I feel that both of those extremes are equally wrong, because they are just there. They are just part of us. They do not have our interests at heart. They have their own evolutionary pressures acting upon them, and often those pressures their interests align with ours. Often we can have this harmonious relationship where they do great things for us, and we keep them in control, and everything's ticking along fine. But every instance of cooperation in the natural world, whether it's us and our microbes, whether it's a giraffe and oxpecker and a cleaner fish and a shark, all of those examples are tinged with conflict. There is always conflict there. So can we tame microbes to improve our health? I'd argue that we sort of have already. Like, we have measures for controlling our multitudes. We have the immune system. We feed them with things like those sugars. We have barriers like mucus to keep them in the right place. So we already have methods for doing that. And I think what we want to do is to go beyond that, to find ways of changing the microbiome to make ourselves healthier. And I think we can get there. But we are still at the very start of that journey, and our efforts to do that are still fumbling and quite basic and often not thought through. We need to think of ourselves as these ecosystems, as these entire worlds, and we need to really embrace what that entails. And I find that in the fields, like scientists who come from a background in ecology are much more savvy about this than those who are coming from like a clinical or infectious disease background, who are much more, the thinking is much more that we can drug it, or we can add a microbe and the good things will happen. I think the reason why there's so much potential here is because the microbiome is flexible. It can change. We have the ability to change it. We just need to work out how to actually do that with the precision that is necessary to actually create a viable, consistent medical treatment.
Well, I will end it there. I should tell you that this book has, I didn't really, as long as we talked for this hour, I'm only knee deep in what you learn. There is a creature in this book who also deserves a t-shirt called Wolbachia, which is this bacteria that seems to be extremely popular in the insect community and is about the most inventive, strange little critter, which I have never heard of. So even though we're not going to be able to talk about Wolbachia or mucus as much as I'd like to keep talking about it, the book is filled with all kinds of weird flavors and strange lessons. And Ed is a peculiarly disciplined reporter. That nothing gets overplayed or underplayed, and yet the prose seems to carry the ship. So this is an unusual talent that Ed has, which is like Carl and Zimmer and some of his friends. There is a group of people in the world who just know how to talk about this complicated stuff in ways that are funny and adventurous and somewhat strangely biographical. You sometimes think you're reading about pirates. I mean, there's some guy who's trying to open up hospital windows. You know, the hospital windows have been bolted shut for 50 years or even 100 years. And so you'll meet people in this book that you don't even know. Or you'll hear about them on Radiolab, because I'm going to steal from this guy like crazy.
Can I just say, a few of us had this joke that it is no one can ever praise me without also praising Carl Zimmer at the same time. If Carl and I weren't really good friends, I would have strangled him by now. He's going to pop up behind this pillow. Hi!
I've never heard of him, so I don't know who he is.
Well, thank you both so much for coming out and talking. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks for coming.